My mistake was thinking that video games are art. I wanted to make a game about a guy who's like a piece of shit, unlikable character who by the end of the game has to transform. Yeah. But too many gamers, when they look at this, when they play a game, they're so used to having to identify with the character that if they play a game where the main character is unlikable or has to do some bad stuff, they immediately get triggered by it.
What you just heard was Andrew Elmson, a developer and writer of the game YIIK, a postmodern RPG. The game released in 2019 to middling critic reviews and abysmal audience scores. And, well, there certainly are many reasons for the negative reviews, including repetitive combat and controversy surrounding the real-life inspiration for certain plot elements. One of the main complaints that almost every review has is how insufferable the characters and overall dialogue are. More specifically, most of the criticism is leveled at the main character, Alex. Alex is self-centered, clingy, misogynistic, and overall kind of annoying. And on the surface, I think that's completely fine to have your main character act like this. Characters like Shinji from Evangelion have some level of overlap in those traits I listed out. And yet, he's held as one of the best characters in all of anime. So, what separates Shinji and the 25-year legacy of Evangelion from Alex in the mostly forgettable game YIIK? We'll get back to this, and by the end of the video, I'll have laid out a clear answer. But for now, I want to talk about two other examples of characters that are incredible, but receive some level of backlash and criticism because of reasons I'll get into. First, I'll talk about Rex. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, and that's largely in part to the phenomenal characters. This game has my favorite cast of characters of any game I've ever played. And, well, a lot of people agree that the characters are great. Occasionally, it's with the caveat of the main character Rex. And, to be honest, I can't really blame most people for not liking him, especially with all the expectations and preconceptions from the first game. Shulk is stoic, determined, optimistic, and kind. Which can make sense, since he is 18 years old and has grown up an orphan in a civilization that has always lived in the threat of an attack from the Mechon. It's reasonable to believe that he gained all these traits as a way to cope with the situation he was born into. Rex, on the other hand, is 15 and lives a much cozier life as a salvager, diving into the Cloud Sea and selling what he finds down there. While Rex might share certain traits with a Shulk, like his optimism, Rex is much more naive and misplaced with his optimism. I think what really shows this best is how both characters start their journey. In the first game, Shulk actively chooses to go on his quest to avenge a certain character after a certain thing happens early in the game. This goes to show his conviction and dedication to his friends, that he would be willing to face seemingly impossible odds to change things and not allow them to happen to anyone else. Whereas, in the second game, Rex is more or less a victim of circumstance. He agrees to salvage for a person who's a known scumbag because he says he'll pay Rex a lot of money, and would you look at that? It goes really bad for Rex. From this example, on the surface, Shulk may appear to be the objectively better and more likable character, but if you ask me, I actually think Rex is a little better. And the reason for that is simple. Rex making mistakes isn't a bad thing. In fact, it can work great. It allows for the character to mature and evolve over the course of the story, and, well, Rex does that. And by the end of the game, he's a lot closer to Shulk in terms of the character traits I listed out. Having Shulk start out at the beginning of the game as mature doesn't leave as much room for him to go through a drastic change throughout the game. And largely he doesn't. The circumstances around him do. And while this works for the original Xenoblade Chronicles game, as it's a much more plot-driven story, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 needed this growth and depth in Rex, since the plot revolves much more around the characters. The other reason people don't like Rex has to do with the way he's presented at the beginning of the game. Early on, Rex makes some stupid choices that, while making sense for him as a more naive character, can be kind of frustrating for the player to observe. Another thing that I've seen criticized endlessly is the voice actor for Rex. And to be honest, he really is at his worst in the beginning. And that's because he has to scream or yell a lot. And He really isn't good at it. In fact, it can be assumed that he's even worse, since they actually had to reuse the same scream 3 times in the same cutscene. I think all of this very well could be enough to turn someone away from continuing the game and seeing it through to the end. JRPGs are long and take an amount of dedication to get through, and when what I call the very beginning of the game takes the full runtime of most films to get through, it can be really difficult to tell yourself to keep going until you get to the good part. So, when a game with a daunting 65-hour runtime doesn't have the strongest opening, I can't really blame anyone for writing it off and disregarding Rex as stupider, more naive Shulk. The next character I'm going to talk about is Raiden from Metal Gear Solid 2, and just to be clear, I'm going to have to spoil some parts of the game. More so than I did with Xenoblade 1 and 2. It's impossible to talk about Raiden without talking about certain things that happen at the end of the game, and that's unfortunate because that's probably my favorite Metal Gear Solid game, and I would hate for this video to ruin that game for someone. So go play it. You can get it for $10 on GOG, but if you do get it there, I would recommend installing V's Fix, since the PC port is not great, and that fixes all of it. A link to the game and V's Fix are in the description. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about Raiden. Raiden is an interesting character, and I think he parallels Alex from Y2K a lot more than Rex might. And that's because Raiden was also designed to be disliked by the player. I still remember when I first completed the Tanker chapter and saw the first cutscene of the Plant chapter, seeing someone swimming and slowly realizing that even though the Colonel is calling this person Snake, they definitely aren't. From there, little things like how he mishears the Colonel when he says node and thinks he said nerd, and how he explains that he only has VR experience and none in the field, make you desperately wish for Snake to come back, and make Raiden appear like an amateur with no real skill. Then, teasing you by showing Snake one step ahead of Raiden on the elevator is just the cherry on top. And these aren't all the examples I could go over. The entire introduction to Raiden is brilliant in how it makes you dislike him and question his legitimacy in the mission. So, the question then becomes, why do people like Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 2 and hate or dislike Alex in Y2K? And while credit could be given to Raiden appearing in Metal Gear Solid 4 as a badass cyborg ninja, I think it more so has to do with the ending of the game. Raiden being a dysfunctional, confused, and vulnerable person are all things that needed to be there in order for the ending to make sense. If Snake or another cooler, calmer character were in the place of Raiden, his psyche and reality caving in would make less sense, and his darker past of being a child soldier would come as less of a surprise. Raiden had to be less cool in order to become a more interesting character by the end of the game. Now, at this point, you've probably noticed a pattern. Both games, Xenoblade 2 and Metal Gear Solid 2, use weakness in a character in order to later turn it into growth. At the start of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Rex is a little bit annoying and naive, and by the end of the game, he's strong-willed and mature. At the start of Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden is lame, inexperienced, and dysfunctional. By the end of the game, he's broken and depressed. Now, let's analyze Y2K. At the start of the game, Alex is unlikable and obnoxious, and at the end of the game, he's equally unlikable and obnoxious, except now he's revealed to be something of a god, and the entire world literally exists only to serve him. He doesn't earn any of this at any point, and the only way it can be argued that it's growth is if you say that the revelation actually retroactively justifies his previous actions. Which could be interesting, but since Alex didn't know any of this until the very end of the game, it doesn't actually change his motivations for acting the way he acts. If it was revealed that Alex actually knew the whole time, I think it could potentially change a lot of people's opinions about Alex and the game overall. If somebody did know they were essentially a god, they probably would treat people differently. But to be fair, if this was a twist, it wouldn't fit with any of the previous plot points, and Alex's motivations for previous actions in the game would make a lot less sense. The point is, Alex's character doesn't change. He's a bad person, and he gets everything he wants. Another character, not from a video game, who parallels Alex in a lot of ways, and I believe was probably, at least to some extent, an inspiration for certain parts of the game, is Shinji from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Shinji is a character who deals with big emotions. He's a character that at times is incredibly relatable, and at other times makes decisions that are hard to watch. By the end of the show, I would say Shinji isn't a great person. A person who's clearly gone through a lot, a character whose psyche is clearly in shambles. But some of the things he does are indefensible, and the show agrees, and because of that, he doesn't get a happy ending. The end of Evangelion is melancholic, horrific, and depressing. Shinji's story ends on a horrific note to emphasize that the show agrees that Shinji isn't good. Y2K doesn't do anything close to this, and if it did, if it showed any level of self-awareness of Alex being a bad person, people's opinion would have been different. But no, in fact, the game does the exact opposite by making Alex a god. The story treats Alex like he's Shulk, when in reality, he's Shinji. This is reinforced by simply looking at a lot of the other writing in the game, and how it really just isn't great. Because of this, it's easy to make the realization Alex wasn't meant to be hated. This is further reinforced by simply listening to the Andrew Allenson clip I played at the beginning of the video. He's noticeably upset. He already lies once by saying the character changes by the end of the game, and because of this, at least in my opinion, I don't think Alex was written to be unlikable, but instead was written to be a hipster, obsessed with 80s pop culture himself and fantasizing about women he knows. So, yeah, I guess in some ways, he was written to be unlikable, just not intentionally. Hey! Thank you so much for watching this video to the end, and if you got this far, I would appreciate it a lot if you subscribed, left a like or a comment, so that more people can see the video. I'm very grateful for anybody who would want to listen to me rambling about video games, and I would love to hear any feedback or opinions you had on the video, or anything I talked about. I'm not sure what my next video will be about, or if I'm even gonna make another video. But it'll probably be about video games, movies, TV show, anime, or music, since that's generally the stuff I like. Maybe also Magic the Gathering. If any of that interests you, and you want to see my next video, please subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. Thank you.